It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you. I think we can speculate and maybe positively for the Democrats and their efforts to keep their majority in the Senate. But even the most optimistic people are cautious about predicting a House dominated by Democrats. I think it's kind of important for America to understand what this would mean to both the Biden administration and for the country to have that kind of significant change. And given their past interests in investigations and so forth, what's your view going forward if that happens?
It's a very good question, and in Washington, the last thing you want to do is speculate too much. But what the heck, we'll throw caution to the wind. As you were asking the question, it reminds me of that movie from a long time ago. I think 1972, The Candidate, where Robert Redford played a candidate seeking the presidency, and he came from small chance to success, and the movie kind of ends with him looking into the camera saying, "What do I do now?" And it's what I think Kevin McCarthy, who is the Republican leader in the House, the minority leader, I think it's going to be what he's asking himself, because here's somebody who came from Bakersfield, California. Nothing against the fine citizens of Bakersfield, but he went to high school there, he went to college there, got elected to a local school board there, he got elected. Well, he became an aide to Congressman Bill Thomas, who is a very bright, was a very bright and tough, but very strong congressman for many years, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He was a staffer to him. Then Kevin McCarthy gets himself elected to the California Assembly. He moves up, into positions, and he finally follows Bill Thomas. And he's been in Congress now for 18 years, something like that. You have to give him credit for somebody who's moved up through the ranks, but he's never had a particularly strong or policy orientation or a stellar list of legislative accomplishments. Some of the lists I've seen that I'm sure we'll hear more about, he's been on both sides of some critical issues like abortion. But he's going to take over, if he takes over, if the Republicans win, he's going to take over the speaker's role. By the way, second in line for succession to the presidency after the vice president. He's going to take this over with a very narrow margin. And the first big issue he's going to have to deal with is, what does his friend Donald Trump say to him with respect to Trump's own ambitions? And there then comes this other key question, which I think every member of Congress, particularly the House member, asks themselves, upon being sworn in, and that's how do I get myself reelected in 2 years? And McCarthy has, it seems to me, a very tough road ahead if he's just going to play politics with the position and try to block initiatives for 2 years. And the betting is that that's what would happen, that as Speaker, the Republican leadership would block any new Biden initiative, would investigate every department and agency if they can find any ounce of suspicion of wrongdoing, and would essentially tie up the administration and make it difficult for Democrats to hold on to the presidency. But that's going to be annoying for a whole lot of voters across the country if that's what he does. And so he's suddenly going to face a very different kind of future. He actually has to, I think, perform in ways he hasn't before. And I put a lot of emphasis on him. Al is much more a student of Congress than I am, but these changes in the House or Senate involve thousands of people. Committee staff change, committee chairmanship change, membership on the committees change. And so the first few months are spent in really a complete reorganization, restaffing in many ways of Congress. And that's going to take some time. But I think for Biden, and I'll stop this comment, but I think for President Biden and the administration, the question is going to be, can they do what Reagan did with a democratically led House? And that is pull away a few Republicans who will give them a majority of votes in the House, even though Republicans have the majority. Can they pull away some Republicans who going back to that key question, what do I have to do to get elected, may feel they actually have to do something besides just be a blocking action, a blocking force for the next 2 years. I think that's where I would start if I was in the Biden administration, to find that group of that block of Republicans and essentially make sure they had what they needed to provide some measure of support over the course of the next couple of years. Because in the end of the day, I think Speaker Kevin McCarthy, if that comes to pass, is mostly about looking out for finding a way for Republicans to win the White House and for him to retain his speakership.
Al, to be fair, you may disagree with my projection that the House will be controlled by the GOP, but if you do have consensus on that with me, what is your kind of view going forward with a GOP-controlled House?
Well, let me start by saying I think this is a very hard election to predict. Is it going to be fought over inflation, crime, and immigration? Or is it going to be fought over preserving democracy, abortion rights, and Donald Trump? In other words, is it going to be a referendum on Joe Biden and his administration or on Donald Trump? That's really the question. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's clear right yet. History suggests that you'd be right, that as we get closer to the election, the fundamentals will prevail. But I think there's some really extenuating circumstances. Obviously, in the Senate, and in some gubernatorial races like in Maryland, the Republicans have nominated election deniers and Trumpies and people who are so far out of the mainstream, they're going to have a hard time winning statewide. In the Senate, including in a lot of states where they should win pretty comfortably, given the fundamentals. The Dobbs decision on overturning Roe versus Wade has energized and galvanized Democrats, and it's eliminated the enthusiasm gap that the out party usually has in a year, in an off-year election. And as I've said over the past few weeks, these the Trump behavior and the January 6th hearings and the continuing investigations are sort of like body blows. They don't knock you out with the first punch, but they do accumulate. And I went over a lot of polling yesterday, and there's not a lot after Labor Day, but there's one or two polls that have gone through that have been taken around Labor Day. And those issues have particular salience in the suburbs and among college graduates, where a lot of the key elections are going to be decided. The fact is that college educated voters and suburbanites and suburban women are really concerned about losing their right to choose, and they don't like Trump. And no matter what happens this fall, the news on Trump is not going to get better. And the way the Republicans are acting in a lot of states is probably going to keep the abortion issue right at the top. So as we go into it, 538 now says the Democrats have a 70% chance to hold the Senate, and the Republicans have a 74% chance of winning the House. My guess is that the Senate is a little high because fundamentals may come back, and even some of those unelectable people may be in really close races. And they're probably about right in the House, so I will agree with you. So no matter what happens, the Senate's going to be close, a seat or two one way or the other. And legislatively, I don't think that'll make it much different than like we've had in the last 2 years. But it will make a big difference on what gets investigated. Because if the Republicans get control of the Senate, they will do a lot of investigations going after a lot of Democrats that they don't like. In the House, it's going to be complete chaos if the Republican wins. Think about this, 147 members of the House voted not to certify Biden's election. It's only going to get worse. Going to be more of them. in the nenext House. Republican speakers who recently have not had an easy time. Boehner quit because he couldn't manage his crazy Freedom Caucus. Paul Ryan quit probably for the same reason. And Craig has personal experience with this because George H.W. Bush had to deal with Newt Gingrich, who really undermined his chances of re-election. So my guess is the Freedom Caucus is going to assert itself. The QAnon faction is going to be in a pivotal role because the numbers are going to be, the margins are small, and all these conspiracy nutcases are going to be greater than the margin of difference. And they go in with no agenda. They've run on nothing. I think whether or not they can even do the basic functions of government is going to be in question, whether they're going to fund the government. We're going to have debt ceiling questions, and they will clearly go after their enemies. And I'd just like to put up one more thing before I end, and that is McCarthy will probably be the speaker, but you know what? Donald Trump might decide he wants to be speaker. And that could be a really interesting thing. I mean, he'll do anything to avoid getting prosecuted, and he may think that's his best hope. So I think it's very unclear what will happen if the Republicans win, except that it'll be chaotic and they won't be able to govern. Now, in the next week or so, we'll start to get the first real comprehensive post-Labor Day polls, and I think we'll get a better idea of what's going to happen. But my guess is that you're right. The Democrats will hold the Senate, and the chaotic Republicans will take over the House.
You know, Craig, I know that you spent a lot of time reconnecting with old friends as you had the hard task of vacationing on Nantucket for the summer. But you have still a lot of contacts in the Republican Party from all different, points of view. Is there a possibility that there could be this mid-election could kind of recalibrate the Republican Party, or you think we're doomed to, so to speak, a magna future for that grand old party?
The discussions have tended to go in the direction of we probably have to go through at least one more round here. I think that there's a real risk that McCarthy as speaker runs things off the rails. I think, as Al does, you can block a lot of things, but you actually have to pass appropriations bills, or you have to pass a continuing resolution, or you have to pass a debt ceiling. And if every one of those things becomes a hot, tough, long negotiation, voters tire of that. They don't want to elect people and see nothing happen in Washington. And so I really do feel that the Republican Party's got to spend a fair amount of time rebuilding. It took a number of years to get where we are, and many of us aren't very happy with where we are. But you've got to have people emerge in leadership roles and begin a rebuilding process. I think, lots of interest in what Liz Cheney is going to do. Stay a Republican, but campaign against other Republicans. That's a tough road to hoe, but she may stir up enough interest and enthusiasm that therein lies the beginnings of kind of a reform party. But I'm one who believes it's going to take probably a couple cycles before we really see any kind of movement towards a more moderate, some more moderate leadership in the Republican Party.
Al, you have the last word this time.
Well, I'd just like to pick up where Craig left off. I mean, the problem the Republicans have is the House is a limited body. They may have 230 members if they're lucky, and 170 of them are going to be nutcases, are going to be election deniers. They're going to be influenced by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert and all those other crazies. And so they're not going to get any reform out of that group. I had, you know, I was part and led a movement to redefine the Democratic Party after we lost more than 40 states in 3 straight elections and lost 49 states in 2 of 4 presidential elections. And I think the reform is going to have to come from the outside. It's not going to come from the inside of the House. Congress is not capable of redefining a political party. There are too many voices. You just can't do it that way. And, you know, I think if there's going to be a redefinition of the party, it's probably going to come from governors. And, you know, if Larry Hogan really wants to do his country a service, he ought to try to lead that. Somebody like Hogan ought to try to do sort of what we did. I mean, you have to do it differently at different times, but basically to shape an agenda that a Republican could take to the country that would take their values and make it and put them into policies that the American people can support. And, you know, and have to basically fight that way. So I don't expect we'll see any redefinition of the party. If they get control of the House, they're going to go crazy. You know, they're going to go after Merrick Garland. They're going to go after Biden, and they're going to go after Hunter Biden. You know, they might go after Hillary. I mean, just think about the way they responded to this raid on Mar-a-Lago with this guy, former president, who I think is either an idiot, a spy, or just delusional. It takes some of our most treasured state secrets and, you know, takes them down to a country club and sort of may have scattered them around. I mean, and what do? They say that's just a storage issue. I mean, that is not a party that is looking to reform itself.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.